It is 3/24 of 2015. We continue with the Dead Sea Scrolls, and we look at a scroll that the authors feel is the most significant scroll for defining the Qumran community, and that is the Nahum scroll, which is a commentary of Nahum. And it's important because it really does address the Hasmonean dynasty and the conflict between the Sadducees and the Pharisees. And so the three authors feel that this commentary, which was Qumran authored and very opinionated, gave the best view of the actual beliefs and attitudes of the Yahad community at Qumran. So it is very much focused according to their plight and their hostility toward the Pharisees and the Hasmonean dynasty. And we begin by looking at the text, the actual Nahum text. It was written, it's a 7th century BCE prophecy. It's a sequel to the book of Jonah. It's situated just prior to the capture of Nineveh by the Babylonians. And the content consisted of 1 through 8 was the character of God. 9 through 15 was God's punishment of enemies. 1 through 13 was the actual destruction of Nineveh. And 1 through 19 was the cause of this destruction. And the Qumran community used this prophecy as a backdrop for their own predicament in being exiled out of Jerusalem and their conflict with the Pharisee flattery-seeking liberals. Now, if we look at what they concentrated the focus, in 88 BCE, Demetrius III of Syria invaded Judea, and Alexander Jannaeus was the king. From 103 to 76 BCE, he was strongly aligned with the Sadducees, and so the Pharisee party did make up a large anti-Jannaeus faction, and they actually formed an alliance with Demetrius III of Syria and actually supported his attack of Judea. Now the revolt failed, and Demetrius III withdrew his troops, and in retaliation, Jannaeus crucified 800 rebels, including Pharisee rebels, and then murdered their wives and their children in front of them while they hung on their cross. A fairly cruel king. In Nahum 2, 11 through 13, Jannaeus is the lion of wrath that is mentioned there. That's the way that the Qumran writer wants to depict Jannaeus as the lion of wrath. The Qumran Yahad actually favored the cruel king, but only because of his hatred of the Pharisees who had supported the rebellion. So it was just really, it was very much a strange situation of Sadducees actually supporting a very cruel individual, but only because he disliked the Pharisees so much and their entire political faction. As we should expect, the Nahum scroll is primarily a scroll that looks at the anticipated apocalyptic judgment against all apostates, and the Hasmonean rule, and the Pharisee governorship of the temple is a very strong apostasy to the Sadducees at Qumran, which had called their Yahad community the new spiritual temple. So we look at the judgment section, and sometimes it'll be addressed to Jannaeus, and sometimes it'll be addressed to Salome, who was his widow, and she is the one who actually put the Pharisees in power after her husband died. She was very much aligned with her brother, the head of the Pharisee party, and she made her son, Hyrcanus II, the actual high priest, and he put together a Pharisee Sanhedrin. So we're going to look at the actual text and the way that the scroll writer wanted to interpret the text for Qumran. In 1:4, God rebukes the sea and dries it up. This means that God will pass judgment on the Pharisee rule in Jerusalem and wipe it off the face of the earth. The flower of Lebanon that languishes refers to the members of the Pharisee party who will perish before the chosen Sadducees. 2:11, where is the lion's den, the feeding place of the cubs? For the scroll writer, Jerusalem is a lion's den, and the Gentile lions seek to enter it, while the Jewish lions are forced and exiled out of it. Demetrius III, the king of Greece, sought to enter Jerusalem through the counsel of the flattery seeker Pharisees with their alignment, but it never did fall to any Gentile occupation until later with what the Qumran writers called the Kittim, which was their reference for the Romans in 70 CE. And now, according to them, Jerusalem is trampled by the Gentiles. The temple is defiled and has appointed positions appointed by Roman government, so it is entirely has been turned over to a impurity and a destructive environment and contaminated environment of Gentiles. Now, in 2:12, the lion of wrath tore in pieces enough for the cubs and strangled enough for the lionesses. This is the reference to the fact that Alexander Jannaeus would actually end up crucifying some of his own nobles and party members who had supported the rebellion. The scroll writer does approve of the 800 crucifixions as proper punishment when it involves a punishment of God's enemies. Filling the cave with prey and the den with game refers to the lion of wrath, Jannaeus. His vengeance against the flattery seeker Pharisees, hanging them alive as in former times. 2:13a signifies that the Lord of hosts is against these Pharisees. Now, if we look at, there's two terms, Ephraim and Manasseh, and they stand for flattery seekers and a possibility that there was a remnant that did actually repent. And the Manasseh were the secular followers of Jannaeus without any religious interest. So 2:13 mentions that God will burn their horde, swords will consume the lions, the prey is cut off, and the messenger's voice is silenced. And the horde is the troops in Jerusalem, the lions are the nobles that supported Jannaeus, the prey is the wealth held by the Pharisee priests, and it will be turned over to Israel, and the messengers are the Hasmonean ambassadors who no longer are heard among the Gentiles. And so the warning is, warning goes out from the prophet, woe to the bloody city, full of lies and robbery. The Qumran writer said that this is pointing to Jerusalem, that the Pharisees conduct themselves in deceit and lies under this ruling authority of the queen. The noise of the whip, the rattling of wheels, the prancing of horses, the bounding of chariots, and the horsemen lifting swords, multitudes slain, stumbling over corpses, all points to the rule of the Pharisees that will always bring on a punishment of the sword of the Gentiles. The Sadducees perceived that any Roman punishment was due to the fact that the Pharisees had committed such an apostasy. And therefore there will be a mass of criminal carcasses that will accumulate, all because of the Pharisees' criminal purpose. 3:4 talks about the multitude of harlots, witchcraft, and the selling of nations. Again, all points for the scroll writer to the deceivers from Jerusalem, the Pharisees. And eventually they will perish because of their arrogant, flattery-seeking talk. The Lord of hosts is against them. And the metaphors are used for uncovering their skirts, showing their nakedness, revealing their kingdom of shame. All of this pointed to, according to the author, the fact that Janneus had to give up some cities of the east to the Arabians in order to win their neutrality. And the skirts referred to the Gentile filth of idol worship. 3:7, Nineveh is finally laid to waste. Who bemoans her? The flattery-seeking Pharisees will eventually pass away. They will no longer deceive the congregation of Israel, and they will be overcome, and so will the respectable nobles of the Hasmonean dynasty. Even the secular Hasmonean dynasty will be overcome, and that will include any help they've had from additional divisive groups that aligned with them. All will be carried away into captivity. The Hasmonean dynasty in the last days will be brought low in Israel, and the wicked of the cup is the Herodian dynasty that will follow, and it likewise will be considered an enemy of the divine. So this is very much points to the historical events. They took this Nahum prophecy of the destruction of Nineveh, applied it to King Janneus, who, even though he favored Sadducees, he was brutal, and then when he died, his wife Salome took over and forcibly exiled the Sadducees out of the city, and they gathered in the Qumran community. And so it points to this apostasy of governorship in Jerusalem, and they use the Nineveh destruction as an example of their apocalyptic hope that eventually God will come in his day of vengeance and retribution and set things right. And they don't necessarily support an evil king, but they support the fact that he did despise the Pharisees. And so that wraps up what the authors felt was a definitive scroll for defining the actual Qumran sect, where their political allegiance did lay, the fact that they were very much opposed to Queen Salome's Pharisee-governed Jerusalem city, and that they hoped for and prayed for the eventual retribution of the divine, who would pronounce a judgment on them just as he had done against Nineveh. And that wraps up 215 to 225 on the commentary scroll of Nahum and the destruction of Nineveh.